Train your mind and take control of your life. There is a moment that almost no one talks about. It is not loud. It is not dramatic. It does not come with a clear warning. It is quiet, subtle, and dangerous. It is the moment you realize you are not in control of your own mind. You wake up with intentions. You tell yourself this will be different. You will focus. You will act. You will finally take control. And yet, something invisible begins to pull you away from that decision. You check your phone without thinking. You delay something small, then something important. Then the entire day starts slipping through your hands. At first it feels harmless. Just a small distraction. Just a short break. Just one moment. But when you look closer, it is never just one moment. It is a pattern repeating itself with precision. A pattern you did not consciously choose, but one that keeps choosing for you. This is where most people misunderstand the problem. They think they lack motivation. They think they need discipline. They believe something external will fix what feels broken inside. But what if the real issue is not what you are doing, but how your mind has been conditioned to operate? Every thought you repeat becomes easier to think again. Every excuse you accept becomes easier to believe next time. Every time you avoid discomfort, your mind learns that avoidance is the solution. And slowly, without realizing it, you are training your mind to resist growth. You are not failing randomly. You are executing a mental program that has been running for years. And here is what makes it dangerous. It feels normal. It feels like you. It feels like your personality, your preferences, your way of being. But it is not fixed. It is trained. The uncomfortable truth is this. If you do not take control of your mind, something else will. Your environment will shape it. Your habits will shape it. Your fears will shape it. And none of those are interested in your potential. They are interested in keeping you predictable. That is why change feels so hard. You are not just trying to act differently. You are trying to override a system that has been reinforced thousands of times. But there is a moment when everything begins to shift. It is not when you feel ready. It is not when motivation appears. It is when you see clearly what is happening. Because once you recognize that your thoughts are not commands but patterns, something breaks. And in that break, a question emerges. A question that most people avoid, because it demands responsibility. If your mind can be trained, then why has it been trained like this? The day you realize you're trapped within yourself. There is a specific kind of realization that changes everything. It does not happen in chaos. It does not arrive with failure or collapse. It comes in ordinary moments, in the middle of a normal day, when nothing seems wrong and yet something feels deeply misaligned. You begin to notice repetition. Not in your environment, but inside your own thinking. The same hesitation before starting something important. The same internal negotiation. The same quiet resistance that appears without explanation. At first, you try to ignore it. You tell yourself you just need more energy, more clarity, a better moment. But then something unsettling becomes obvious. Even when the conditions are right, you still do not move. You have time, but you waste it. You have knowledge, but you delay action. You have intention, but something interrupts the execution every single time. This is where awareness begins to sharpen. The obstacle is not outside. It never was. There is a structure inside your mind that is actively working against you, not because it wants to harm you, but because it has been trained to prioritize comfort over progress, certainty over growth, and familiarity over change. And the most dangerous part is how natural it feels. These patterns do not feel like limitations. They feel like identity. You do not question them because you assume they are part of who you are. But they are not. They are learned responses. As Epictetus taught in Enchiridion, Chapter 1, some things are within your control and others are not. But most people never truly examine this distinction. They react to everything as if it controls them, and ignore the one thing that actually does. Your interpretations, your reactions, your internal dialogue. This is the invisible prison, not built by walls, but by unquestioned thoughts. And once you see it, you cannot return to ignorance. Because now, every hesitation becomes visible. Every excuse sounds different. Every delay exposes a pattern that was always there, just hidden beneath routine. This realization is uncomfortable. It removes every external excuse. It forces you to confront something direct and undeniable. You are not stuck because of your circumstances. You are stuck because of what you have allowed your mind to repeat without resistance. And this is where most people retreat. Because if the problem is internal, then the responsibility is unavoidable. But if you stay in this moment, if you resist the urge to escape into distraction or justification, something powerful begins to form. Clarity. And with clarity comes a new possibility. Because if your mind created this pattern, it means something else is also true. It can be retrained. The invisible cycle of intelligent self-sabotage. There is a version of self-sabotage that is easy to detect. It is loud, obvious, and impulsive. But that is not the one that controls most lives. The most dangerous form of self-sabotage is quiet, calculated, and often mistaken for intelligence. It sounds reasonable. It feels justified. It presents itself as caution, as analysis, as preparation. And because of that, you trust it. You tell yourself you are thinking things through. You say you are waiting for the right moment. You convince yourself that starting now would not be optimal, that you need more clarity, more certainty, more structure. And while all of that sounds responsible, something is happening beneath the surface. You are delaying action without admitting it. This is not laziness. This is a refined form of avoidance, one that uses logic as a shield. The mind becomes incredibly skilled at protecting you from discomfort. It does not say, "Do not act." It says, "Not yet." It does not reject the goal. It postpones the effort. And that small shift changes everything. Because "not yet" feels harmless. It feels temporary. But when repeated enough times, it becomes permanent. You start building arguments that sound intelligent. You gather more information than necessary. You overanalyze simple decisions. You create complex plans that never leave the paper. And each of these actions gives you the illusion of progress without the reality of movement. This is the trap. You feel productive, but you are not advancing. Seneca warned about this in Letters from a Stoic, Letter 1, when he pointed out that people are often busy without purpose, occupied but not effective. They confuse motion with progress and preparation with execution, and that confusion becomes a cycle. The more you think, the more you delay. The more you delay, the more pressure builds. The more pressure builds, the more you feel the need to think even more before acting. And suddenly, you are trapped in a loop that feels responsible but produces nothing. This is intelligent self-sabotage. It adapts to your awareness. The more you try to improve, the more sophisticated your excuses become. You no longer say, "I do not feel like it." You say, "This is not the right strategy." You no longer avoid openly. You justify strategically. And this is why it is so difficult to break. Because it does not look like resistance. It looks like reasoning. But there is a question that exposes everything. If your thinking is helping you, why are you still in the same place? At some point, you have to confront the possibility that your thoughts are not guiding you forward. They are holding you in place. And this is where a shift becomes necessary. Not in your goals, not in your plans, but in your relationship with your own thinking. Because not every thought deserves your trust. Some thoughts are not there to guide you. They are there to protect your comfort. And if you cannot distinguish between the two, you will continue to mistake hesitation for wisdom. This realization leads to a deeper and more uncomfortable question. One that most people avoid because it challenges a deeply held belief. What if the version of you that keeps planning, analyzing, and waiting is not preparing for action? What if it is actively preventing it? The illusion of "I will change tomorrow." There is a sentence that sounds harmless, almost hopeful. It gives you a sense of control without demanding anything from you in the present moment. "I will start tomorrow." It feels responsible. It feels organized. It feels like you are making a decision. But in reality, This sentence has quietly destroyed more potential than failure ever could. Because tomorrow is not a real place. It is a psychological escape. When you say you will change tomorrow, what you are actually doing is protecting yourself from the discomfort of changing today. You are not committing to action. You are postponing responsibility. And the mind is very good at making this feel acceptable. It tells you that you need a fresh start, that today is not ideal, that beginning tomorrow will be cleaner, more structured, more intentional. And that logic feels convincing because it removes pressure from the present moment. But here is what goes unnoticed. Tomorrow carries the same version of you into it. The same patterns, the same hesitation, the same internal resistance that stopped you today will be waiting for you again. Nothing magically resets. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, Book 5, Paragraph 1, that you could leave life right now, so let that determine what you do and say and think. This is not about urgency for the sake of fear. It is about clarity. The only moment you can act is the one you are in. And yet, the mind resists this truth, because acting now is uncomfortable. It requires confronting resistance directly. It forces you to move without the guarantee of feeling ready, and most people are not trained to do that. So they negotiate. I will start when I feel more motivated. I will begin when I have more time. I will commit when things are clearer. Each of these statements feels valid, but all of them share the same structure. They place action in the future and keep comfort in the present. This creates a dangerous pattern. You begin to associate intention with progress. You feel good about deciding to change, even when nothing has changed. And over time, this weakens your ability to trust yourself, because every time you say you will act and you do not, you reinforce a silent belief. Your decisions do not lead to action. This is where control begins to slip. You are no longer directing your behavior. You are observing your own inconsistency. And once that pattern is repeated enough times, something even more subtle happens. You stop expecting yourself to follow through. That is the real cost of tomorrow. It does not just delay change. It erodes self-trust. But there is a moment when this illusion breaks. It happens when you see clearly that waiting is not preparing you. It is weakening you, because action does not require the perfect moment. It requires interruption of the pattern. And that interruption can only happen in one place. Now. Which leads to a deeper confrontation. If tomorrow is an illusion, and now is uncomfortable, then one question remains. What are you actually avoiding when you choose to wait? The comfort that is destroying your potential. There is a version of comfort that heals you, restores you, gives you strength to continue. But that is not the comfort controlling your life. The one that quietly shapes your decisions is different. It does not restore you. It sedates you. It removes friction. It eliminates effort. It makes everything easier, faster, and more immediate. And at first, this feels like progress. Why struggle when things can be simple? But something starts to change. You begin to lose your tolerance for difficulty. Small challenges feel heavier than they should. Tasks that require focus feel exhausting before you even start. And slowly, without noticing, your standard shifts. What used to be normal effort now feels like pressure. This is how comfort becomes dangerous. Not because it feels bad, but because it feels too good for too long. Your mind adapts to the easiest available path. It learns that discomfort is unnecessary, that effort can be avoided, that stimulation is always within reach. And once that adaptation happens, anything that demands discipline feels unnatural. You are not weak. You are untrained. Epictetus taught in Discourses, Book 1, Chapter 18, that difficulty shows what men are. But in a world designed to remove difficulty, most people never discover what they are capable of, because they never stay long enough in resistance. You check your phone the moment boredom appears. You switch tasks the moment focus becomes difficult. You avoid anything that creates internal tension, and each of these decisions teaches your mind the same lesson. Discomfort is something to escape. And if discomfort is something to escape, then growth becomes something to avoid. This is the hidden cost. Not immediate failure, but long-term stagnation. You start choosing what is easy over what is necessary. You prioritize feeling good over becoming better. And over time, your potential is not destroyed in a single moment. It is slowly abandoned through a series of comfortable decisions. The most dangerous part is that this feels normal. Everyone around you is doing the same thing. The environment reinforces it. The systems are designed for it. So you do not question it. But there is a point where the consequences become impossible to ignore. You realize that your ability to focus is weaker. Your discipline is inconsistent. Your tolerance for effort is low. And suddenly, you are not in control. You are reacting to whatever feels easiest in the moment. Seneca warned in On the Shortness of Life that people waste time as if they had an endless supply of it. But comfort accelerates this waste. It fills your time with ease and leaves you with nothing of substance in return. This is where a shift must happen, not by removing comfort completely, but by redefining your relationship with it. Because if you only act when something feels comfortable, you will never reach a level where control is required. And control is built in resistance. This leads to a critical realization. The problem is not that life is hard. The problem is that you have trained yourself to avoid what makes you stronger. So the question becomes unavoidable. If comfort is weakening your mind, what is it costing you that you have not yet measured? The decision fatigue and the collapse of willpower. There is a limit to how many decisions your mind can handle before it starts to degrade. Not dramatically, not in a way that alarms you, but gradually, quietly, almost imperceptibly. And by the time you notice it, your ability to act is already compromised. You wake up and begin deciding what to check first, what to respond to, what to prioritize, what to ignore. Each choice seems small, insignificant, harmless, but they accumulate, and with every decision, something is being spent. Your mental energy. At first, you still feel in control. You can focus, you can choose, you can act. But as the day progresses, something begins to shift. You hesitate more. You overthink simple actions. You delay tasks that require effort. This is not a lack of discipline. This is depletion. Your mind, overwhelmed by constant micro-decisions, starts searching for the easiest available option. Not the best one, the easiest one. And that is where control begins to collapse. You choose distraction over focus. You choose comfort over effort. You choose postponement over action. Not because you want to fail, but because your system is overloaded. This is decision fatigue. It does not announce itself. It disguises itself as mood, as lack of motivation, as disinterest. But beneath all of that, there is a simpler reality. You are exhausted from deciding. Marcus Aurelius reflected in Meditations, Book 8, paragraph 36, that you must be like the rock that the waves keep crashing over, remaining firm. But that firmness is not automatic. It requires preserved mental strength. And most people spend that strength on things that do not matter. You think about things that will not change your life. You reconsider decisions that were already made. You entertain distractions that fragment your attention. And all of this drains the capacity you need for what actually matters. By the time you face something important, your mind is already compromised. So you delay. Not because you are incapable, but because you are depleted. And this creates a dangerous misunderstanding. You start believing that you lack willpower, that you are inconsistent, that something is wrong with you. But willpower is not the problem. The way you are using it is. Every unnecessary decision weakens your ability to make a necessary one. This is why some days feel productive and others feel impossible. It is not randomness, it is accumulation. The more scattered your attention, the weaker your control. And the more choices you allow into your day without structure, the less capacity you have to execute what matters. This is where most people try to push harder. They try to force discipline. They try to rely on motivation. But they are fighting the wrong battle. Because control is not built by making more decisions. It is built by eliminating the ones that do not matter. This is the shift. You do not need more willpower. You need fewer conflicts. You do not need more effort. You need more clarity. Because when your mind is not overloaded, action becomes direct, clean, immediate. And when action becomes immediate, hesitation loses its power, which leads to a deeper question. If your energy is being drained before you even begin, then what part of your life is silently consuming your ability to take control? The mental noise. You learn to ignore. There is a constant stream running through your mind. It never stops. It does not wait for permission. It comments, judges, anticipates, criticizes, and repeats itself with subtle variations. And most of the time, you do not even notice it. Not because it is quiet, but because you got used to it. This is mental noise. It is not a single thought. It is a pattern of automatic thinking that operates in the background, shaping how you feel, how you react, and ultimately, how you act. And the longer it goes unexamined, the more authority it gains. You assume it is you. You hear a thought that says you are not ready and you believe it. You hear a thought that says this is too difficult, and you hesitate. You hear a thought that says you might fail, and you step back. But here is what most people never question. Where did these thoughts come from? They were not chosen consciously. They were repeated. Over time, your mind learned to generate familiar responses to familiar situations. It built shortcuts. It created default reactions. And now, those reactions appear automatically without effort. This is efficiency, but it is also limitation. Because if the default is negative, hesitant, or fearful, then your behavior will follow that pattern without resistance. Seneca wrote in Letters from a Stoic, Letter 11, that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. But when imagination becomes constant noise, suffering no longer feels like imagination. It feels like truth. And that is where control is lost. You do not question the thought. You obey it. You do not pause to examine it. You react to it. And the more you react, the stronger the pattern becomes. This is how mental noise becomes identity. Not because it is accurate, but because it is repeated. You start to define yourself based on the thoughts you experience most often. You say you are anxious, distracted, inconsistent, unmotivated. But what you are actually describing is not who you are. It is what your mind has been trained to produce. There is a difference. But you can only see it if you create distance. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, Book 12, Paragraph 3, that you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. But that power does not come from controlling thoughts, it comes from observing them, from recognizing that a thought is not a command, it is a suggestion, and suggestions can be ignored. This is the moment where everything begins to shift. Not when the thoughts disappear, but when you stop automatically following them. You start to notice the patterns, the repeated doubts, the familiar excuses, the predictable fears. And instead of reacting, you pause. That pause changes everything. Because in that space, you are no longer inside the noise, you are looking at it. And once you can see it, you can question it. Once you question it, it begins to lose authority. But here is the challenge. Most people avoid this awareness. Because facing your own thoughts without distraction is uncomfortable. It removes the illusion that your reactions are justified. It forces you to confront how much of your life has been shaped by something you never examined. And yet this is where control begins. Not by silencing the mind, but by refusing to be controlled by it. Which leads to a deeper realization. If your thoughts are not always reliable, then why have you been trusting them without question? The paradox of freedom. The more options you have, the less control you feel. You were told that freedom would give you control. More choices, more opportunities, more paths to take. The assumption seems obvious. If you can choose anything, then you are in control of everything. But something unexpected happens. The more options you have, the harder it becomes to decide. The harder it becomes to commit. The harder it becomes to move. And slowly, without realizing it, freedom turns into friction. You open your day with possibilities. What to work on, what to prioritize, what direction to follow. Everything is available. Everything is open. And instead of clarity, you feel pressure. Because every option carries a hidden cost. If you choose one path, you eliminate the others. If you commit to one direction, you close the door on alternatives. And your mind resists that loss. So it hesitates. It delays the decision. It keeps options open. It tells you that you need more time, more information, more certainty before choosing. But what it is really doing is avoiding commitment. Because commitment requires sacrifice. And in a world full of options, sacrifice feels unnecessary. But here is the paradox. Without sacrifice, there is no direction. Without direction, there is no progress. And without progress, control becomes an illusion. You are not moving forward. You are circling possibilities. Epictetus taught in Discourses, Book 2, Chapter 15, that no man is free who is not master of himself. And yet, most people define freedom as the absence of limits, not the presence of control. They believe that keeping options open is power, but in reality, it is hesitation. Every time you refuse to choose, you are not preserving freedom. You are avoiding responsibility. And that avoidance fragments your attention. You start multiple things without finishing them. You shift focus constantly. You reconsider decisions that were already made. And each of these actions weakens your ability to follow through. Because your mind is not designed to operate in endless possibility. It needs constraints. It needs direction. It needs a clear path where energy can be applied without constant reevaluation. But when everything is an option, nothing becomes a priority. This is why you can feel overwhelmed even when nothing is technically wrong. You are not lacking opportunity. You are lacking structure. And without structure, your mind keeps searching instead of executing. Seneca wrote in Letters from a Stoic, letter 45, that if a man knows not to which port he sails, no wind is favorable. And that is exactly what happens when you refuse to commit. You drift, you stay busy, but you do not advance. You explore, but you do not build. You think, but you do not execute. And over time, this creates a subtle form of exhaustion. Not from effort, but from indecision. Because every unmade decision still consumes energy. Every open loop still occupies attention. And eventually, you reach a point where you are tired, but you have nothing concrete to show for it. This is where a shift becomes necessary. Not toward more options, but toward fewer. Not toward more freedom, but toward deliberate constraint. Because control is not the result of having everything available. It is the result of choosing what matters and eliminating what does not. And that requires something most people avoid. Closing doors, which leads to a deeper question. If your inability to choose is what keeps you stuck, then what are you afraid of losing when you finally commit to one path? The fragmented identity you are maintaining. There is a version of you that exists in your thoughts, focused, disciplined, consistent. This version knows what needs to be done and does not hesitate. It acts with clarity, moves with intention, and follows through without negotiation. But there is another version of you that shows up in reality. This version delays. It questions itself. It starts and stops. It promises and does not deliver. And the distance between these two versions is where frustration begins to grow. Because you are not lacking awareness. You know what to do. The problem is that you are trying to operate with two conflicting identities at the same time. One identity is built on intention. The other is built on habit. And habit is stronger. You wake up with the intention to act like the disciplined version of yourself, but your behaviors are still aligned with the version that avoids discomfort, that seeks ease, that hesitates under pressure. So what happens? You experience internal conflict. You decide to focus, but you reach for distraction. You plan to act, but you delay. You commit mentally, but you withdraw behaviorally. And each time this happens, the gap between who you think you are and how you actually behave becomes wider. This is fragmentation. You are not one consistent identity. You are switching between versions depending on what feels easier in the moment. And the more you switch, the less stable your sense of self becomes. Because identity is not built by what you think. It is built by what you repeatedly do. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, Book 10, paragraph 16, that a man's worth is no greater than the worth of his ambitions. But ambition without aligned action creates tension, not progress. You begin to question yourself, not because you lack potential, but because your behavior does not match your intention. And this mismatch erodes trust. You stop believing your own decisions. You stop relying on your own commitments. You start expecting inconsistency from yourself. And once that expectation is established, it reinforces the cycle. You hesitate because you doubt yourself. You doubt yourself because you have hesitated before. This is how fragmentation becomes identity. You are no longer acting as one person. You are reacting as multiple versions of yourself, each one pulling in a different direction. But here is what most people never confront. You cannot build a controlled life on a divided identity. At some point, one version has to take control. Seneca wrote in Letters from a Stoic, letter 20, that to be everywhere is to be nowhere. And the same applies internally. If you try to be multiple versions of yourself, you end up being none of them fully. This is where the shift must happen, not by adding more motivation, not by creating better plans, but by deciding which version of you is real, and more importantly, which version you are willing to reinforce through action. Because identity is not discovered. It is constructed. Every action you take is a vote. Every decision you follow through on strengthens one version and weakens the other. And over time, one of them becomes dominant. So the question becomes unavoidable. Which version of you are you feeding every single day? The silent fear of becoming powerful. There is a fear that does not look like fear. It does not paralyze you in obvious ways. It does not announce itself as anxiety or panic. It hides behind hesitation, behind delay, behind subtle resistance that feels almost reasonable. It is the fear of becoming powerful, not power in the external sense, not status, not recognition, not control over others. This is something deeper, the power of discipline, the power of consistency, the power of knowing that if you commit, you will follow through. Because once you reach that level, something changes. You lose the ability to hide. Right now, inconsistency protects you. It gives you an excuse. It allows you to say you could do more if you really tried. It keeps your potential undefined, and because it is undefined, it cannot be judged. But the moment you become consistent, the moment you take control of your actions, that protection disappears. Now your results are real. Now your limits are visible. Now there is no distance between what you are capable of and what you actually produce. And that is uncomfortable. Because as long as you are inconsistent, you can always imagine a better version of yourself. But once you become disciplined, imagination is replaced by reality. Epictetus taught in Discourses, Book 3, chapter 24, that if you want to improve, you must be content to be thought foolish and stupid. What he meant is simple. Growth requires exposure. It requires stepping into a space where you can no longer protect your ego. And most people avoid that. Not consciously. They do not say they are afraid of growth. They say they are not ready. They say they need more time. They say they are preparing. But beneath all of that, there is a deeper resistance. Because becoming powerful means becoming responsible. You can no longer blame circumstances. You can no longer rely on mood. You can no longer justify inaction. Every result becomes a reflection of your choices. And that level of ownership is heavy. So the mind creates subtle barriers. It makes you hesitate right before progress. It introduces doubt at the exact moment action is required. It distracts you when focus becomes critical, not to stop you completely, but just enough to keep you from crossing the line. Because once you cross it, there is no return to comfort. You cannot unknow what you are capable of. And that is where the real fear lives. Not in failure, but in the responsibility that comes with capability. Seneca wrote in On the Happy Life that no man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity. Because without adversity, you never discover your strength. But discovering your strength also removes your excuses. And without excuses, you are left with only one thing: choice. This is the moment where everything becomes clear. You are not being held back only by weakness. You are also being held back by the fear of what happens when you are no longer weak. Because strength demands consistency, consistency demands discipline, and discipline removes the illusion that you cannot. So the question becomes direct. If you know you are capable of more, what exactly are you protecting by staying where you are? The mental training. No one taught you. You were taught how to think, but not how to train your thinking. You were taught what to learn, what to remember, what to achieve. But no one showed you how to build a mind that can execute under pressure, resist distraction, and act without negotiation. So you improvised. You relied on motivation when it appeared. You depended on discipline when you felt strong. You tried to push yourself when things mattered. And when none of that worked, you assumed something was missing. But nothing is missing. What you were never given was a system. Because the mind is not controlled by intention. It is trained by repetition under resistance. And most people only repeat what is easy. They act when they feel like it. They focus when it is convenient. They commit when there is no friction. And because of that, their mind never develops the capacity to operate when conditions are not ideal. This is the gap. You are trying to perform at a level you have never trained for. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, Book 2, Paragraph 1, that at dawn, you should remind yourself that you will meet interference, ingratitude, arrogance, dishonesty, ill will, and selfishness. Not to become negative, but to prepare your mind for reality. That is training. It is not about reacting better after something happens. It is about conditioning your mind before it happens. But modern behavior does the opposite. You wait to feel ready. You wait to feel focused. You wait to feel motivated. And when those states do not appear, you do nothing. This creates dependency. Your actions become tied to your emotions. Your consistency becomes tied to your mood. And your progress becomes unstable. Because emotions fluctuate, training removes that dependency. It creates a different standard. You act whether you feel like it or not. You focus whether it is easy or not. You execute whether you are comfortable or not. And at first, this feels unnatural, because you are going against the patterns you reinforced for years. Your mind will resist. It will create excuses, it will introduce doubt. It will try to pull you back into familiar behavior. Not because it is right, but because it is known. And this is where most people stop. They interpret resistance as a sign that something is wrong, but resistance is the training. Epictetus taught in Discourses, Book 1, Chapter 24, that difficulties are things that show what men are. But more than that, they are the environment where the mind is shaped. Every time you act despite resistance, you weaken the pattern of avoidance. Every time you focus despite distraction, you strengthen your ability to control attention. Every time you follow through despite discomfort, you reinforce discipline. This is not theory. This is conditioning. And conditioning requires consistency, not intensity, not bursts of effort, but repeated exposure to controlled difficulty, small actions, done without negotiation, repeated daily. This is where the shift happens. You stop asking yourself if you feel ready. You stop waiting for the right moment. You stop negotiating with your own decisions. You execute, and over time, something changes. The same tasks that once felt difficult become automatic. The same resistance that once stopped you becomes weaker. The same hesitation that once controlled you disappears. Not because you eliminated it, but because you trained past it. Seneca wrote in Letters from a Stoic, letter 37, that a gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a man perfected without trials. And mental training is exactly that friction. Without it, your mind remains reactive. With it, your mind becomes directed. And once your mind becomes directed, control is no longer something you chase. It becomes something you operate with, which leads to a deeper realization. If your mind can be trained through repeated action, then every moment of hesitation is not neutral. It is training something. So the question becomes unavoidable. What exactly are you training every time you choose not to act? The break from emotional autopilot. There is a pattern that runs your life without asking for permission. It is fast, automatic, and deeply ingrained. You feel something, and before you even notice, you react. You feel boredom and you reach for distraction. You feel pressure and you delay. You feel uncertainty and you hesitate. It happens so quickly that it feels natural, almost inevitable. But it is not inevitable. It is conditioned. Your mind has learned to associate certain emotions with specific behaviors, not because those behaviors are the best response, but because they have been repeated enough times to become automatic. This is emotional autopilot. And as long as it remains active, control is an illusion. Because you are not choosing your actions, you are executing patterns. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, Book 8, paragraph 47, that the mind becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. But what happens when those thoughts trigger actions before you even examine them? You lose the space between stimulus and response, and that space is where control exists. Most people never notice this gap because it is so small, a fraction of a second between feeling and reacting. But inside that fraction is the difference between being controlled and being in control. The problem is that your mind is trained to close that gap. It wants efficiency. It wants speed. It wants immediate resolution. So it shortcuts the process. It removes awareness and replaces it with reaction. And the more you allow this to happen, the stronger the pattern becomes. You stop questioning your responses. You stop observing your emotions. You start identifying with them. You say, I am distracted instead of I feel distracted. You say, I am unmotivated instead of I feel resistance. And that subtle shift changes everything. Because once you become the emotion, you no longer have distance from it. You act from it. Epictetus taught in Enchiridion, chapter 5, that men are disturbed not by things, but by the views they take of them. But if you never pause to examine those views, they control you without resistance. This is why breaking emotional autopilot is not about suppressing feelings. It is about inserting awareness before action. You feel the impulse, but you do not immediately obey it. You notice the discomfort, but you do not escape it. You observe the urge, but you delay the reaction. And in that delay, something powerful happens. You regain control. At first, it feels unnatural. The mind resists the pause. It pushes for immediate action. It tries to convince you that reacting quickly is necessary, but it is not. It is habitual, and habits can be interrupted. Seneca wrote in Letters from a Stoic, letter 71, that the greatest obstacle to living is expectancy, which depends upon tomorrow and wastes today. Emotional autopilot works the same way. It pushes you toward immediate relief, sacrificing long-term control. Breaking it requires a different approach. You do not follow the feeling. You examine it. You do not escape the discomfort. You stay with it. You do not react automatically. You choose deliberately. And each time you do this, you expand that gap. What was once a fraction of a second becomes a moment of awareness. What was once automatic becomes optional. And once your reactions become optional, your behavior becomes intentional. This is where control truly begins. Not in what you feel, but in what you choose to do with what you feel. Which leads to a deeper question. If your reactions have been automatic until now, then how much of your life has been lived without conscious choice? The point of no return. When you take control, there is a moment that does not feel dramatic, but it changes everything. No announcement, no external validation, no visible shift to the outside world. And yet, internally, something becomes irreversible. It is the moment you stop negotiating with yourself. Up until now, every decision has been open to discussion. You decide to act, then question it. You commit, then reconsider. You choose a path, then hesitate when it becomes uncomfortable. This constant negotiation creates instability. Your actions are no longer determined by your decisions, but by how you feel after making them. And feelings are unreliable, so you move forward, then backward. You start, then stop. You commit, then withdraw. Not because you lack capacity, but because you never established authority over your own behavior. But there comes a point where this pattern becomes intolerable. Not because it is new, but because you finally see it clearly. You see how every delay weakens you. You see how every excuse reinforces the same cycle. You see how every moment of hesitation keeps you in the same place. And something shifts. You stop asking if you feel ready. You stop waiting for the right conditions. You stop explaining your inaction. You decide, and then you act. This is the point of no return. Not because you will never struggle again, but because you will no longer accept your own avoidance as valid. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, Book 6, paragraph 30, that the impediment to action advances action, and what stands in the way becomes the way. But this only becomes real when you stop treating obstacles as reasons to delay. You begin to use them. Discomfort is no longer a signal to stop. It becomes a signal that you are exactly where you need to be. Resistance is no longer a warning, it becomes part of the process. And this changes your relationship with action. You no longer rely on mood. You no longer depend on motivation. You no longer require certainty. You operate. Epictetus taught in Discourses, Book 1, chapter 29, that no great thing is created suddenly. And this is where most people misunderstand control. They think it appears all at once, fully formed. It does not. It is built in moments like this, quiet, decisive, repeated. Moments where you follow through when it would be easier not to. Moments where you act despite hesitation. Moments where you execute without discussion. And each time you do this, something strengthens. Not your confidence, your authority. You begin to trust your own decisions, not because they always feel right, but because you consistently follow them. And that trust changes everything. Because once you trust yourself to act, hesitation loses its power. You no longer debate whether you should do something. You already decided. You no longer question your ability to follow through. You have proven it. You no longer look for external validation. Your actions become your proof. Seneca wrote in Letters from a Stoic, letter 76, that it is not because things are difficult that we do not dare, but because we do not dare that they are difficult. And daring, in this sense, is not dramatic. It is disciplined. It is choosing to act when your mind suggests delay. It is choosing to move when your emotions suggest comfort. It is choosing to follow through when everything inside you wants to negotiate. This is the shift. You are no longer reacting to your mind. You are directing it. And once that direction is established, something becomes clear. You cannot go back to being passive. Because now you know. Every moment of hesitation is a choice. Every delay is a decision. Every action is under your control, which leads to the final realization. If control is now in your hands, then what kind of life are you willing to build with it? The unbreakable mind. The beginning of your new life. There is no dramatic ending, no final transformation that suddenly turns you into a different person overnight. That idea was always an illusion. What actually happens is quieter, but far more powerful. You become consistent, not perfect, not unstoppable, not immune to difficulty, but consistent in a way that changes everything. You think and you act. You decide and you follow through. You face resistance, and you move anyway. And that consistency begins to reshape your entire reality. Because an unbreakable mind is not one that never struggles. It is one that no longer stops because of the struggle. This is the difference. Before, discomfort was a signal to hesitate. Now, it is a signal to continue. Before, doubt interrupted your actions. Now it exists without controlling them. Before you needed the right conditions, now you create movement regardless of conditions. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, Book 4, paragraph 3, that if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. And now, that understanding becomes practical. You no longer amplify difficulty in your mind. You face it directly. You no longer interpret resistance as a problem. You recognize it as part of the process. You no longer wait to feel ready. You act and readiness follows. This is where life begins to change in visible ways. Your actions become predictable, but in the right direction. Your focus becomes stable. Your discipline becomes reliable. Not because you feel different every day, but because you stopped depending on how you feel. And this creates momentum. Small actions, repeated without negotiation, begin to accumulate. What once felt difficult becomes standard. What once required effort becomes automatic. What once felt impossible becomes part of your routine. This is how a new identity is built. Not through intention, not through motivation, but through repetition aligned with decision. Seneca wrote in Letters from a Stoic, Letter 8, that the greatest obstacle to living is expectancy, which hangs upon tomorrow and loses today. But now, tomorrow is no longer your focus. Execution is. You are no longer projecting change into the future. You are producing it in the present. And this is what makes the mind unbreakable. Not strength in a single moment, but reliability over time. Because life will not become easier. Challenges will not disappear. Uncertainty will not fade. But your response to all of it will no longer be unstable. You will not collapse under pressure. You will not hesitate in the face of difficulty. You will not negotiate with your own standards. And that is control. Not control over everything around you, but control over the one thing that determines everything else. Your mind. This is where most people stop searching. Because they realize something that changes the way they see everything. There is no secret left to discover. There is only what you choose to do next. And now, for the first time, that choice is entirely yours.